Hi, I'm Tom, also known as Winklenator. I wanted to make this video to talk about the division and fan bases of the Assassin's Creed series, a series that I've loved for a long time, and I've played it even up through its latest release, Assassin's Creed Mirage. And I just really wanted to talk about my opinions on the division between the fan bases because one of my favorite YouTubers in the Assassin's Creed community had made a community post, and I was just going through the comments, and it's kind of disheartening to see how people act towards each other for really just sharing their opinion, and how people take their opinion and really try to turn it into objective fact and an attempt to say my opinion's better than yours. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. And I'm actually coming fresh off of, I played through Assassin's Creed 2, and I'm actually playing through Assassin's Creed Odyssey to kind of gain some perspective on how the series has really changed over the years. And so here's my thoughts. We obviously have a no question divided fan base, among Assassin's Creed. When Assassin's Creed Origins came out, there was quite a 180 degree change from the gameplay, turning into more of an RPG, and really, I think, making the game a bit more combat focused, even though there were quite a bit of mechanics in the game that allowed you to play very stealthily. Parkour was definitely sidelined. It's gotten to the point where you were just basically holding X, and if you're a console PlayStation gamer like me, but there's I just want to first start by saying I like all the Assassin's Creed games, even Valhalla, and I think that there's something to love about every game. I think that there's a lot of elements of any video game, and people are going to pick and choose what they really like about it. And at the end of the day, that's what determines whether you're going to come back to the series when a new title's released, or if you're going to go do something else. So, so first I'll kind of talk about the perspective as like an old school fan looking at the newer games now, kind of excluding Mirage, because I think Mirage was a pretty good return to roots in the older school games. There was a lot more DNA, Assassin's Creed DNA and Mirage, of the older games than in the other RPGs, obviously. And those elements were really minimized in Assassin's Creed Mirage. So, my perspective is it can be frustrating in any type of lore where you've invested your time over the years and then the company decides to do a huge change. I mean, look at Star Wars fans, where Disney has drastically changed from George Lucas's, image or version of Star Wars, which is a tough comparison to make, obviously, because I genuinely do like a lot of the newer Assassin's Creed games, and I don't like any of the Disney Star Wars movies. But looking at it, it can be frustrating for old school fans to be playing a series they want, and then suddenly the company decides to change. And unfortunately, there's a bigger audience that prefers a RPG style game that also has an immersive historical experience. And I understand with games like Skyrim that if you look at a game like Valhalla, you may attract more fans outside of your existing fan base, and then now you have a completely new audience that you have to please. And so that can be frustrating. If you're first to the party, I think you kind of hope to be more catered to. Unfortunately, if we all spend the same money on the games at the end of the day, Ubisoft really has to make a decision on what part of the fan base they want to please. And I think they found with Valhalla that although at first you can get a lot of people interested by appealing to the mass of several parts of your fan base by little aspects and making it seem like a return to roots as an appearance. But when you really get deep into the game and over time, less and less people are playing it. So, in terms of the newer games versus the older games, and kind of coming from that perspective, I would say that it was kind of cool to see the series make a change. I would just argue there's a lot of elements of the newer games that I think they didn't have to change. You take Cassandra, for example, throughout her story, and you had the legacy of the First Blade DLC where they brought a hidden blade into the picture, even though it was kind of hidden, as worn on the other side of the wrist. But then she crafts her own hidden blade after that. And I just thought to myself, why couldn't have they had a hidden blade when you first played Odyssey? I think a lot less people would have been mad. I think Origins actually does a pretty good job, albeit I do think that there is elements of the lore, like the Creed, that I wish they would have talked about in Assassin's Creed Origins. I think that the game overall, you can play stealthily. I also think the parkour didn't really have to change as much. You do have these open world terrains, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take those mechanics out of the way, especially when you're in a city like Athens in Odyssey or Valhalla. I mean, there was a couple areas and forts and castles that you went to where you still could have had actual parkour. I mean, obviously, I think it works better in a city setting like Mirage. And I think that's why the parkour was a bit better in Mirage, was because it was able to be used. You can't really parkour across vast forests unless you make a game kind of like AC3 or Rogue. So the question is, are the old games better or are the newer games better? I think it all depends on personal preference at the end of the day. I will say, I think that there is elements of the older games that I do think are genuinely better, like the story. I think that the story writing has genuinely not been as compelling, and I think that's because Ubisoft is focused more on the historical immersion aspect and creating interesting historical characters and situations rather than focusing on more of the philosophical aspects like you see in the Creed, which I think is more representative of Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I think that is very well missed in Rogue. They try to do it, but there's not a lot of nuance. It's essentially, we're going to show the assassins losing their way, and the Templars are actually kind of good when you look at it. But that's not really nuanced, not like the way we got in Assassin's Creed 3. Now, combat, I think, is pretty cool in the newer games. And I think that if you really enjoy RPGs, I think if you really enjoy that dynamic combat and trying to upgrade your armor and weapons constantly to get the best build, then I think that those are cool games. I do think it seems a little weird for the series. I think that when you look at a game that was based on stealth, although there wasn't a crouch button in earlier games, which seems weird for a stealth game, I think that the games were primarily focused on stealth. And the only time you really got into combat, you do see moments of that especially in the Ezio trilogy. And but the point of it is that Ezio as an assassin wasn't just a normal assassin. He was kind of a goat. I mean, he just really destroyed a ton of enemies in his path. And that's why I think Unity was so compelling of a game, because I think it encouraged stealth, and I think it really showed that you want to be the hidden blade in the crowd that we saw with the first Assassin's Creed game. I think that there's nothing wrong with a game like Odyssey. I just wish that Ubisoft would possibly start another series or look at another way to create historically immersive games without necessarily tying it to the lore of Assassin's Creed. Or if you're going to do that, then add more lore in there, relate it more to the story. Like I said with Origins, I think that there's missed opportunities. Although I think the lore comes more into play as the hidden ones, age over time, and I think close to the time they become assassins, really before the Crusade era. I think that they reinvented the origin story. It was really just more mysterious in AC1 when you look at the history of the assassins. And you more so in AC2 with the tombs that you see, they're more like proto-assassins, people who exemplified the creed and aspects of it before the order actually existed. And I do think that I did like the way that Origins allowed you to play stealthily. I think in Odyssey you can play stealthily, but it's not as satisfying. You have so much more opportunity to use your crazy Isu powers because you're basically a demigod. In Valhalla, the stealth is broken. You really can't play stealthy. It's just not. It's not fun. It's frustrating when you get discovered and then basically every enemy within miles of this huge fortress knows who you are and knows where to find you. I think the detection system in Odyssey was actually great, and if they didn't have so many of the Isu crazy powers that you get with the spear, then I think you could play a lot more stealthy and it would have still been satisfying. They would have gave you smoke bombs if you would have had the blow dart. I think that it could have allowed you to play stealthy. And I think for that time period, it's not totally out of the question at the end of the day. A smoke bomb doesn't require gunpowder. So you have ways of, kind of doing that. I mean, hell, in Mirage, you can literally basically create a smoke bomb by cutting spices and creating like a cloud of red smoke. So I think that Ubisoft really had a way to not irritate their entire fan base, but still create these interesting historical experiences like a Viking and Mystios and being in ancient Egypt. I think they could have still done that, but I think they still could have stuck to the original formula. Now, as far as my thoughts for the future of the series, I would like to see them kind of do a balancing act, because I think Black Flag was a perfect example of how you can please, I think, people in both arenas. I think that this Black Flag remake will definitely be interesting to see how they handle it. I do think for that game, and that era, I think the counter kill system was great. I think maybe they didn't have to take the chain kill into account, and maybe I really wouldn't be mad if they didn't carry that over to the new remake. But I still think that they could have a lethal hidden blade. They had that as a setting in Valhalla, and I think that blade should be lethal. I think that if you strike an enemy with a sword, like 3 or 4 times to critical organs, then they should die. And you saw that as an updated setting in Valhalla. And that's really how the combat system worked in Unity. I also think parkour is essential to the game series. I don't know why they ever got away from that. I think that if there was anything they wanted to return to roots on, it would definitely be the parkour, because that's what gave inspiration to the game, coming from the Prince of Persia series, the platforming and, the kind of wall climbing that you do where you're like riding along the wall. And that, I mean, I don't think that you have to make it back to the Ezio trilogy, although that is my favorite parkour, actually, because the amount of control you have. But I think there's a balance that they could strike. I think Unity was a good example of that. As many issues as people had with Unity at launch, I actually did not play Unity at launch. I'll totally admit that. But so looking forward, I also think that they need to be more careful about their settings and how they relate it to the story. What I'd like to see them bring back is a modern day that matters. I think that the modern day doesn't really matter a lot in the newer games, other than to kind of bring around this apocalyptic plot again. And it's just kind of messy, considering what they did with like Unity and Syndicate, where you're really not in the modern day, or active in it. And I don't know. I'm just not compelled. Like I was, where I hate to say the Ezio trilogy like an old school fan, but the Ezio trilogy was a great example of how the modern day should be, where what happens in the Animus actually relates to the modern day. It actually drives the plot forward, where they're finding these temples and areas that Ezio is going to of importance, and then they're actually going there in the modern day. And I always thought that was super cool. I mean, not to mention, the whole Desmond returns to Abstereo and just kind of obliterates everyone with his assassin abilities that he's obtained over the years in the Animus. So, again, I think that the newer games aren't terrible. I think that they could keep a lot of elements in. I think that there's also a lot of elements from the older games that they can incorporate. And I think, back to Black Flag, I think they could really appease both fan bases. You play as Edward, and he's a pirate for most of the game, but he acts like an assassin. He really is an assassin in most of the sense, except for his motivations. And then the way that they show his losses and his motivations kind of just lead him astray down a horrible path. He basically hits rock bottom and then learns to take the creed on as a guiding principle. And I think it really starts to get interesting when he has that conversation with Bartholomew Roberts, where they basically talk about, like, does it even matter to have a creed? Because at the end of the day, when you're at your lowest point, you really just resort to your animal instincts anyways. And Edward learns that it is important to have guiding morals, because people get hurt, people get killed, you care about get hurt and killed. And I think that was one of the most compelling ways to show the true meaning of, nothing is true, everything is permitted. I would love to see the philosophical emphasis come back to these games. And truth be told, if they kept the combat as is from Valhalla, really in that mode where it takes like a few hits to kill people, I think that I would be happy if they brought back the parkour, the philosophical elements, maybe tone down some of the Isu stuff. I think that stuff is cool, but relate it to the overarching conflict between assassins and Templars, because this is kind of a topic that we get away from, I think, in the newer games, where these elements exist in the world, but the Order doesn't care about it. The Order of the Ancients doesn't care about it. The Cult of Cosmos doesn't really care about it, other than the Isu Pyramid and maybe Folke, who, like, is kind of obsessed with sages and things. So, anyways, we're about 20 minutes in. I don't want to drone on too long. I already feel like I have quite a bit, but that's just my take. That's why I wanted to explain, hey, this is where I think each side is coming from. And I don't necessarily think anyone's inherently wrong, but I do think that there's an opportunity to kind of please, I'd say both arenas of the fan bases, even though there might be more than that. And I really hope that Ubisoft, takes feedback and makes changes to their next titles like Red and Hexe, and just really kind of aims to please everyone, but they do it in a compelling way, not a surface level way like I felt they did in Valhalla. But anyways, this is Winklinator. It's a pleasure. Please like, subscribe if you want to watch more content on Assassin's Creed. And I'll be uploading some videos, fairly shortly of me playing through some games like Odyssey, and I'll probably go back and play some older games as well too. So thanks. Have a great one. Bye.